and considered to be the world's leading authority on that subject.
And are there a lot of people who study Jack the Ripper? I mean, I know everyone probably watched the television series and all that sort of thing, but are there many people who still to this day...
Oh, indeed,
indeed.
It's a hobby with people, and from all walks of life and from all over the world. And believe me, that the interest in the Whitechapel murders can only be described as phenomenal. And in fact, there's more interest now than there ever was at the time in question.
Right. How long have you been interested in it?
11 years.
Right. And
non-stop.
And what started this off?
Well, I read many books on Jack the Ripper, and in my opinion, they all amounted to rubbish, and rubbish of the first order. By that I mean that all these so-called theories would never have stood up in a British criminal court of law. And so I thought I'll investigate them for myself. And I was lucky enough to find the last known victim of Jack the Ripper, namely Mary Kelly, buried right on the corner of my street. That is to say, St Patrick's Cemetery, Langthorne Road, Leytonstone, which in fact is 2 minutes walk from Leyton Tube Station.
I was just going to say, it's round the corner, isn't it? We could just go around there and look at it now.
Exactly,
amazing, I better not... Let's start off, first of all, by saying to anybody listening, forget anything you've ever heard before about Jack the Ripper, anything you've seen on television. John, tell us a bit about those murders.
Right.
The true facts.
All that really happened should only take about 1.5 minutes to tell. That between January and November 1888, a number of prostitutes were murdered in and around the Whitechapel area. But the only ones you could really put down to Jack the Ripper were the last 5, because the same modus operandi was used in each case. And as you know, the police never found him, and that ended the Whitechapel murders. But in 1891, that is 3 years later, the New York City Police came to London, went to Scotland Yard and complained that they had had a prostitute murdered in New York by the name of Old Shakespeare. And her death was consistent with a type Jack the Ripper would hand out. Scotland Yard said that was nonsense. They had Jack the Ripper bottled up in London, and it was only a matter of time before they nabbed him. After all, they were then known as the Great Scotland Yard. Well, the Americans went back, and about 6 or 9 months later, the Paris police turned up. They said, we've had a similar murder. And Scotland Yard said, it's not surprising, we'll probably hear from Australia and New Zealand next. Carbon copy, don't worry, we'll get Jack, leave him to us. And that was the end of the story.
How did they expect it to be a carbon copy? I mean, in those days, we're talking about, how long? At least over 100 years ago.
103 years, yes.
They couldn't turn on the television as you can nowadays and say, oh, something's happened in London. How did news spread from London to New York to Paris about these murders?
Well, of course, like anything else, you know, how did Charles Dickens get over to the United States? You know, it was, it just travelled. Of course, news was slower in those days, I agree with you. That's why I said before, there's more people interested now because news travels fast, and also because in working class areas, people are better educated than there was in those days, you see. So anyway, that is really all that's happened.
Right. Now, they were particularly horrific murders, weren't they?
Well, there was, and the worst one, of course, was Marie Jeanette Kelly. She was but that was the name she liked to be known as. It was really Mary Jane Kelly, but she liked to be known as Marie Jeanette. And, of course, she suffered the worst death. In fact, one of the police officers said, compared to her, the others only needed first aid treatment. He really did work on Mary Kelly, you know. And of course, she was the only victim murdered indoors. The rest, as you know, he slaughtered in the street. Yeah.
Did the police have theories at the time, the police at that time?
They hadn't got a clue. None at all. But an interesting point, that will prove interesting in a moment, the general public said, we believe the person you're really looking for is in all probability an escaped lunatic. And I've got it in writing from Scotland Yard. At the time, they said the upshot was we checked every lunatic asylum throughout Great Britain, including, of course, Broadmoor. We asked 2 questions. 1, have you released anyone in the past 12 months who might just prove to be a potential Jack the Ripper? Answer, no. And silly to ask you, but you haven't had anyone go over that wall, have you? Oh, no, definitely not. Thank you.
I suppose if they had, were they likely to have admitted to it?
Well, I now know someone did go over the wall. And I also know why they were most reluctant to mention it. And it wasn't because they thought he was Jack the Ripper. When he went over the wall from Broadmoor, it would appear he stole all the staff's wages, amounting to what they called a considerable sum in gold sovereigns. So they just didn't want that made public. But in fairness to them at the time, they did not connect him with the Whitechapel murders.
Okay, well, we'll go on to talk about him in just a minute, but there have been a lot of theories since, a lot of books written.
Indeed there has. Yes.
And they've blamed everyone from royalty to everything.
The Duke of Clarence and Montague Druitt, and we've even had a Jill the Ripper, you know. She was a mad midwife, and she carried out illegal abortions. The only thing is that none of those women wanted an abortion. They weren't pregnant. And then we've had the theory that a doctor or his son caught a venereal disease from Mary Kelly, really, and to get at Mary, made inquiries through the other prostitutes and killed them so there'd be no witnesses. But sadly for him, at the post-mortem, Mary Kelly didn't have a venereal disease, so you forget that one.
Right. Which of these theories do you think is the best? I mean, there are theories that most of the murders, 4 of them, were cover-ups for the 5th or something like that. I mean, do any of them hold water?
Well, none of them. They're absolute nonsense. You see, the point is, none of them would stand up in a British criminal court. You can't go into the Old Bailey and say to that learned judge, it must have been the Duke of Clarence because we're homosexual and he had starey eyes. I mean, well, he wouldn't even allow you. If he'd allowed you in the courtroom, he'd probably put you away for contempt. And so none of them would stand up.
So what have you done to actually prove this? You've looked at documents and all that sort of thing.
It took me 11 years working night and day, and I'm still working. And but now I can, without fear of ridicule or intelligent contradiction, tell you that the man responsible for the Whitechapel murders was the one James Kelly, who was born in 1860 in Preston in Lancashire. His mother was described as of ill repute and 100% illiterate, and he was born out of wedlock, which, as you will appreciate in those days, to be born out of wedlock carried a terrible social stigma. A quick example, to get a job as a postman or a nurse, you turned up with your marriage lines, not to determine your age, but to determine your origin. And if they found you were illegitimate, they not only asked you to leave the premises, but believe me, they would insult you as you did so. So it would appear that as soon as James Kelly was old enough to roam, that's exactly what he did. I've traced that he went down to St Albans in Hertfordshire, was befriended by a vicar, and then he left there and turned up at the Angel, Islington, North London. And then he took up lodgings at 21 Cottage Lane, Islington, which is opposite St Mark's Hospital, which is still standing. And in 1883, he married the eldest daughter of his landlady, Sarah, and she became Sarah Kelly, like his mother. He'd only been married 14 days when he came home one night and he accused her of walking up a street, Islington, with local trash. A row ensued, and the upshot was he picked up a knife and stabbed her in the neck, damaging what they called the right carotid artery. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder, and she was shipped off to St Bartholomew's Hospital. And I've been there, I've seen the records, it's all there. After a couple of days, the authorities at St Bartholomew's rang the police and said, you better get out here because she's not going to last. They went out there with the magistrate and took a deposition. In other words, they took a statement. And the following morning, she died. They now went back to James Kelly and charged him with murder. And he was placed in Newgate to await trial. Eventually he appeared at the Central Criminal Court, and in no time at all he was found guilty. And there was only one answer, and that was the rope. And he said to Kelly, the judge said to Kelly, have you anything to say why sentence of this court should not be passed upon you? And Kelly replied, I've been in touch with the dear Lord, and he has forgiven me. I ask my fellow man to do the same. Spare me, so that I can spend the rest of my life in the service of God. Can I tell you something, he said, about the immorality of women? At that point, the judge stopped him and told him he was hardly in a position to moralise, and in effect said, take him away and hang him.
Okay, so we've got the story. He's murdered his wife. He's going away for the vote.
Right.
Well, obviously, he got away somehow, according to you.
Yeah.
We'll take a break for a little bit of music now.
Mm.
In your large collection of documents and what would you call it?
The biggest collection in the whole. I've got the most comprehensive files in the world on Jack the Ripper, you better believe.
How many records have you got about Jack the Ripper?
Well, if you count records, birth certificates, marriage lines of all them victims, newspaper reports, letters I've had from people from all around the world, you're talking about 250,000.
Amazing, isn't it?
It might have taken 11 years.
Okay.
I'll say quickly, if I'd have known it was going to take 11 years, I think I'd have taken up bricklaying or piano or something like that.
Now, how many songs have there been about Jack the Ripper? Because when I knew you were coming in, I thought, well, I'll do a little bit of homework and find something appropriate to play.
There was a pop song, wasn't there?
There was.
Somebody told me that. Of course, that must have been before my investigation. But in fairness, at my age, I'm 23. Well, okay, I'm 67. I don't have much time for pop music. In fact, when Gracie Fields died, I stopped listening.
Well, I'll tell you, shall I?
Yeah.
It was 20 years ago that pop song came out, because I've dug it out to play.
Have you found it?
I have.
That's
and
lovely.
do you know who it's by?
No.
Screaming Lord Such.
Go on.
The guy that stands for
He's not that fellow, just a
politician with the top hat.
Go on.
20 years ago, he released this song. So let's have Hands for Parliament, each by-election, Screaming Lord Such and Jack the Ripper, and that came out in 1973.
Around Whip's Cross, we're with you, and we're with you all the way. Music to your ears, Whip's Cross Hospital Radio.
In Britain today, there are 650 very special nurses. They're called Macmillan nurses, and their job is to provide medical assistance and emotional support to cancer sufferers in their own homes. And that's the key factor, to help patients to lead a fulfilling life with their own families at home. At the moment, though, there are not enough Macmillan nurses to go round. If you'd like to know more about Macmillan nurses or make a donation, then phone 071 351 7811. That's 071 351 7811. The Macmillan Fund for Cancer Relief.
Hospital Radio Patient Information Service.
Whip's Cross Hospital Fact File.
Now, if you're in hospital because of a stroke, you might like to know about an association of 3 informal social clubs run by volunteers for stroke victims and their partners. First of all, the Connaught Stroke Club is based at the Connaught Day Hospital here in the grounds of Whip's Cross, and they meet every other Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the evening. There's also the Chingdale Stroke Club, and they also meet every 2 weeks, this time on a Monday evening, and that's at the Chingdale Centre in Chingford. And there's also a third club who meet on alternate Thursday afternoons, and that's at the Alice Burrell Centre in Sidmouth Road, Leyden. Now, if you'd like more details, or you'd just like someone to talk to you about recovering from a stroke, then you can call Carol from the Connaught Stroke Club on this number, 081 527 6310. That's Carol Court, the Connaught Stroke Club, 527 6310.
Have you heard the news? We've got something for you, so we're glad you're tuning our way. Because we're your friendly radio station, with music and laughter to brighten your stay. You can have a request, we give you the best and easy listening, you can't go wrong. We put a smile on your dial with so many good things going on. With features, news and sports, and local information, we're your friendly bedside station. Turn us on and listen. Hospital Radio, I'm smiling through Hospital Radio.
If you just picked up your earpiece, good evening. This is Whips Cross on a Wednesday evening. It's the Midweek Magazine with John Dahl until 9 o'clock. Requests and dedications with Mike after the news at 9. But between now and then, I'm joined by John Morrison. And if you haven't just picked up your earpiece, you've missed the truth about Jack the Ripper, the murders, but you haven't yet found out who Jack the Ripper really was. Now, we've talked about James Kelly. We got to the point where the judge said, take him off and he's going to be hanged.
That's right.
How did he get away with it?
Well, they placed him in the condemned cell at Newgate. And in those days, they had 2 warders with you to make sure you didn't hurt yourself before they finished, before you got executed. And he paced up and down the condemned cell, repeating what he'd said to the judge, that the Lord was walking with him, and could he tell them about the immorality of women. And by this time, of course, God's got a mission for him in life, you see. And all this was reported to the Secretary of State, who decided that Kelly was nothing more than a star-raving lunatic. So he commuted the sentence to one of life in what they then called Her Majesty's Criminal Lunatic Asylum, Broadmoor, which is in Berkshire. And Kelly was shipped off there, and it would appear from the moment he entered, he carried on his religious act, because that's all it was, as we shall see later on. So he went around telling the other inmates that God was coming round the mountain any moment, and as he walked past, he'd give the guards one of Kelly's blessings, you see. So they decided Kelly was a religious lunatic, but he was harmless, and that is what Kelly wanted them to think about him, On the 23rd of January 1888, he acquired a ladies' corset spring, which wasn't difficult because he used to have ladies at Broadmoor at that time, inmates of course, and from it he fashioned a pass key, and he flipped all the security locks, which let him out into the grounds. And I've every reason to believe he then entered the administration block and added insult to injury by stealing all the staff's wages amounting to what they called a considerable sum in gold sovereigns, and then Kelly went smartly over that wall.
And that was the last Broadmoor saw of him for a long time.
For a long time. And then in April 1927, a staggering 39 years later, Kelly by this time a down and out, sleeping rough on park benches, getting on in years, fast failing in health, empty in pocket and stomach, decided Broadmoor wasn't a bad place after all. So he tramped all the way back to Broadmoor, and you remember in those days, no motorways, little winding country lanes. Anyway, he got them back. And by the time he got to the gate, he looked a sorry sight. So he knocked, and the warder came out and asked him what he wanted. And Kelly said, I escaped, I've come to give myself up. And the warder said, by the looks of you, I couldn't even walk. Now, it's obvious you're a tramp looking for a bed for the night. Now, either you get on your merry way, or I'll send for the police and have you arrested. At that point, an elderly retired warden, doing his guarding, went over and asked what the fuss was all about, and he immediately recognised Kelly. And between them, they made a mistake which, in the very near future, Broadmoor are going to regret, and that is they opened the gates and let James Kelly walk in. And the moment they did that, he became, in legal terms, an untouchable, because he was a certified criminal lunatic. And whatever Kelly may or may not have done while he was out, you couldn't have charged him with anything, for a smart lawyer would say, my client is unfit to plead. By your own reckoning, not his. He didn't certify himself. Anyway, they then took him up before the superintendent, that's like the governor of an ordinary penal institution, and Kelly was asked, where have you been for 39 years? And Kelly said, I went away to sea. By the way, he said, I had an exciting time in New York and Paris. But before that, Kelly, what did you do before? He said, I had a ripping time in Whitechapel. Now, whether it was the superintendent of Broadmoor on his own initiative or acting on behalf of the Secretary of State, I do not know, but they definitely placed Kelly in solitary confinement. Get rid of him. Within 18 months, Kelly was found dead in his cell. Now, I do know that anyone dying in a penal institution must be subjected to a post-mortem by law.
Right.
But Broadmoor carried out post-mortem for two reasons. One, to conform with the law, and two, to find out how he did die. But they didn't know how he died. The results of the post-mortem, I've got his death certificate, I've got the reports and everything. They said he died as a result of double lobar pneumonia. Now, as any doctor will tell you in this hospital, you don't walk very far with that. He would spot you a mile off. And when you consider, like Whitcross Hospital, Broadmoor, you're watched in patients are like a cat watching a mouse. So Kelly would have been normally treated had he not been in solitary, lying on his bunk and no one knew about him.
You're saying they just locked him up and forgot about him, basically?
That's right. And the Secretary of State, because certainly the Superintendent of Broadmoor didn't have the authority, gave the orders, I want Kelly buried quickly and quietly in the precinct of Broadmoor. I don't want him out. Even in death, I don't want him out. And that was done, and he's there today in an unmarked grave.
He's actually in the Guinness Book of Records, isn't he? As
He's in the Guinness
longest
Book of
escaped
Records.
prisoner.
They've got it all wrong. They've wrote me a letter saying thank you.
Really?
Yes, and they said that James Kelly was the longest escapee from a British penal institution. He was on the run for 39 years. That he killed his wife in Liverpool, and they got it all wrong. So I wrote to them and I said, not only have you got his. He didn't die in 1930, he died in 1929. Here's a copy of his death certificate. And I said, he didn't murder his wife in Liverpool. He did have Liverpool connections, by the way, but he didn't murder his wife in Liverpool. As you can see, he murdered her. So they altered it. And now, if you look at the new one, it's all been put right.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how can you categorically say Kelly was Jack the Ripper?
Right. Now, of course, I haven't got a video of him actually committing the murders. No.
All but, though, by the sounds of it.
I wish I did. This way, that anything and everything ever said officially now, not these books, rubbish, but anything officially ever said about Jack the Ripper, I can let them write it all down, and believe me, it'll be quite some list. And without looking at it, I can say, James Kelly, ditto, he fits the lot. I was accused by a solicitor of saying, it's a good story, Morrison, but at the end of the day, you're only coming up with circumstantial evidence. You've got a good case, But then when you come to think of it, 90% of murderers, possibly more than that, are convicted on circumstantial evidence. It's very rare indeed you get an eyewitness to murder.
Indeed, yeah.
And a quick word, the Lord Chief Justice of Great Britain in 1928 was judging the case of an appellant who claimed he had been wrongly convicted because the evidence was circumstantial, he said, and somewhat coincidental. And Lord Hewitt, who's Lord Chief Justice, with two other colleagues, said this, and I'm quoting him now, not me. He said, circumstantial evidence is very often the best, for it is evidence of surrounding circumstances which, by undesigned coincidence, will prove a proposition with the same accuracy as mathematics. And he then gave the appellant the thumbs down. And that became known as the Hewitt principle with regards to circumstantial evidence, and has been used by no less an authority than the United States Supreme Court. So were I posthumously taking Kelly to the Old Bailey tomorrow, but no good that judge handing me that circumstantial stuff, or I should say, I will not allow you, the Crown, to have your cake and eat it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. Now, you're convinced he did the Whitechapel murders.
Right.
What about this New York and Paris business? Were there copycats?
Well, as I said, don't forget, before Kelly surrendered, as I already explained, the New York police came here. The Paris police came. And the first thing Kelly said when he surrendered in Broadmoor, I had an exciting time in New York and Paris.
Now, could he have known about this maybe copycat murders and tried to claim responsibility?
He could very well have done, but then you see the point is, I was at sea, not for very long, or in the 50s, and believe me, in 39 years, okay, well, let's say 30 years, because he was getting on in years at the end, say 30, my word, he would have been in every country on earth, because, we had the greatest maritime fleet of all time. He would have been all over the world. Yeah, he just had to mention them two places.
And they were the two places.
And they were the two places.
And the times, did they fit together? Did the years when these murders were committed?
Well, they came after 1888. As I said, 1891, I think was the beginning, although I stand to be corrected, but the beginning of 1891 when the New York police came over, and it was in 91, probably towards the end, when the Paris police came over.
Right.
So, yeah, and I've also found out since, officially, that James Kelly got deported from the United States, yes, and not as Jack the Ripper, and he didn't say he was an escapee from Broadmoor. He said he was an Englishman and he was an illegal immigrant and all the rest, so the Yanks shipped him back, and they told the police, we're sending him back via a ship to Liverpool. So the police queued up, you know, on the docks with the sticks and all the rest of it, waiting for Kelly to get off the ship. Well, it was accidental. The ship docked on the other side of the Mersey in Wallasey, and Kelly got Birkenhead, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And Kelly waved across to him and walked away. There was on the wrong side of the river, you know. And we know it's funny. That really happened, you see. But he wasn't giving himself up as Jack the Ripper. He was just an illegal immigrant to the United States.
And then he was away, I suppose. That was it after that.
He went, and then and that was in 1909.
Yeah.
So, as I said, he gave himself up in 1927. So, but that's what he said he'd been away to sea. I mean, he could have been up to all kinds of things, you know.
Okay. Right. We accept that James Kelly is the true Jack the Ripper, or
Yeah.
was. Where do you go from here?
Well, I've fortunately I met a gentleman because of the publicity, and I've had lots of publicity, and he's writing the book at the moment. And I've been doing all the research, as you've just heard. The manuscript will be ready by the end of the year. Only yesterday I got a letter from him saying he's got a good literary agent who thinks we should have no trouble with the publisher because the story is certainly original, you know.
You haven't come up with this just to write a book, though, have you? I mean, this is your life at the moment.
Life, it's my, and I know, you know, people will say, well, he's coming in a bit strong, but it's perfectly true. If the Queen came in the studio now and said, look, forget all that, let's put a match under it, here's the keys to the Bank of England, I would not take it. I think someone once said, you came into this world with nothing and you'll go out with nothing. But, you know, I really believe you can take something. I mean,
you've got a sense of achievement, haven't you?
You're right. You can say, well, the world's a little smarter now than it was when I came along. And yes, you can take that with you. Yes, indeed.
Okay, so you're having the book published. Do you reckon that's going to upset anybody?
Oh, it's going to upset them all. I mean, they're already condemning me. You know, I've been condemned something terrible. There's every book, I would say, in the past 3 years that's been published, you'll find Morrison. And I think, well, if I'm worthy of mention, I'm deserving of notes, you know.
Yeah.
And if they've got the A to Z on Jack the Ripper, what anybody's ever said, and, well, if it weren't for me, I don't think they'd have a book that would be deported. Terrible. And all these people who are saying, in my opinion, it was the